veterans, like the reason why companies typically want to hire veterans is for their soft skills, right? Like there's intangible assets. Like these are people that can operate in ambiguous, very high stress environments. They're mission focused. They can get shit done, right? They're fast learners. They don't need someone to kind of watch over their shoulders every step of their way and tell them what to do. You can give them a problem and they will figure out how to solve it.
All right, what's up, guys? Hey, did you know we as humans take more than 22,000 breaths a day on average? And around 80% of us have some sort of dysfunction with our breath that negatively affects our performance athletically and in life. Today, we're going to get into that with Josh Duntz, co-founder of Stasis. Before we do, a couple reminders, a couple thoughts for you guys, and a couple highlights from the show before you dive in. So just in terms of reminders and challenges, you know, I love some BHAGs, right? I love some big, hairy, audacious goals. Going through a process of resetting some of those for myself for Q4 or the balance of this year and Q1 of next year. Great to keep this stuff on the calendar as a challenge, as adversity to grow from, stuff that's scary to lean into, and really just keep things on the calendar to continue to train towards them. So encourage you guys to do that. As always, reach out, share your BHAGs and your accomplishments. You know, what did you get out of them when you went after them? You know, succeed, fail, lessons learned, wins and lessons, right? Second thing is, and it's in the same spirit, is remember, you've always got to lead yourself first. That work on yourself is going to show up in life, in relationships, in business, not only in your health, right? It's synergistic. And as you lead yourself down that path, you will find others come along for the ride. So lead yourself first and others will follow. You've got to lead from the front on that one. All right. So today with Josh Duntz, episode 107. You know, I got the flag here in the background. I've got the Spartan, for those of you on video, one of the Spartan shirts with the American flag on it today too. Very appropriate for our guest, Josh Duntz. He is a 10-year veteran of the Naval Special Warfare community as an EOD tech, a bomb tech, right? So love the chance to talk to this guy about breath and where that would show up in a job that's stressful. Not only deploying in active duty special operations military, but dealing with explosives. So talk about that. More importantly, for all of us, breath as it shows up in our performance in athletics and everyday life. They're doing some really cool work through Stasis. I got a couple notes here from going through their website myself. Medically, they're working with doctors. They are, by the way, a data-driven breathwork business, right? So this isn't just something touchy-feely. This is backed by data, by science, by studies, and they are applying this for amazing health benefits, including some things like dealing with post-acute COVID syndrome. If you hit the website stasis.life, and we'll get links up to all this stuff, they're going to talk to you about mechanics of breath, chemistry of breath, that's volume, that's rate of breath, some different breathing patterns. They've got some good stuff in there on single and alternate nostril breath, around things to activate the vagus nerve. You'll learn about the health benefits of that. Some breath hold exercises, box breathing, of course, a 4 to 6 breath ratio for down regulating your system. They talk about sleep apnea. And for those of you who like a challenge, there are a couple metrics they can walk you through in some of those just free videos, even before you get into the coaching or paid content in the Stasis breath work. There are a couple metrics or tests you can take, max exhale test, the MET, and the breath hold test, the BHT. So those are pretty interesting. They are good indicators of sort of where you are on a health scale around your O2 and, more importantly, your CO2 tolerance, which is one of the other highlights that came out of this conversation with Josh in the research they were doing. Folks who ended up with severe respiratory effects of COVID, even those who had still had a good high blood oxygen saturation, their CO2 levels were down, CO2 tolerance, and that balance between CO2 and O2. So we'll talk about that in the episode today with Josh Duntz, and the material that Stasis has in the videos on their website speak to testing and then building your CO2 levels, your CO2 tolerance levels. So all this relates back to what we're talking about right here, enhancing and optimizing human performance. So those are really kind of the highlights with Josh around Stasis. And then we'll also hear about the work he's doing with Shift, putting veterans to work as they transition from the military, taking their very, very specialized and valuable skills and applying them in the private sector for growth of American businesses. So all great stuff Josh is doing. I know you're going to like this conversation. Josh Duntz, episode 107 of Men to Mastery. Go. All right. All right, Josh, we're rolling. Josh, welcome. Josh Duntz is a veteran, 10-year veteran of the Navy Special Operations EOD in particular community. He's now CEO of Stasis. Stasis.life is their website. We'll talk more about that. And he also works on a project in a company called Shift, an organization that's involved in getting veterans a career path into the civilian world once their military career or life is over. So Josh Duntz, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have you today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a lot of cool stuff going on. I know we got introduced by way of some other folks here in the community, Andrew and the guys over at Fierce Planet Adventures. I think it's a, it's obviously a huge world. The cliche is it's a small world. I think as we niche down to, if we talk about Stasis first and kind of work backwards and work forward from there, you got a lot of focus on breath. And so I think if you get into sort of the Western world and the focus here on breath, it's a pretty small world. I had a teacher who said, literally breath is life, right? Like we come into the world, that's the first thing we do. We gasp a breath and we start screaming as babies. And it's the last thing we do before we kind of leave this plane. So everything in between, unfortunately, we oftentimes take it for granted. And there are just amazing and tremendous health benefits or detriments to having intentionality to the quality of how we breathe and what it does. So tell me a little bit more about Stasis and your mission and how you got involved there.
Yeah. So Stasis was probably started off as a passion project, like a lot of companies do, something I was super interested in. Last couple of years while I was still on active duty in the Navy, some training buddies of mine and I just had gotten kind of more introduced, I guess, to some of the the Wim Hof stuff. We were doing saunas and ice baths and started doing some breathing exercises and stuff. And it was something that was very foreign to me. And honestly, it took some pushing from some of my friends for me to be open-minded about it at the time, because it seemed just very esoteric in nature. I wasn't into meditation or any of that stuff back when this was happening. And so when some of these people just brought it up and how much it could change you, I was just I wasn't buying what they were selling basically. But it was people that I worked with and trusted a lot, and they were really good athletes. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to give it a try based off of me just believing in these people. And it made a big difference in how I felt and my training, my recovery, especially on running is kind of where I would notice a big difference. I was really big into CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting at the time, and wasn't running a ton, but I could notice a difference kind of right away when I was just really focused on nasal breathing and controlling my respiration rate and kind of my breathing pattern on runs. And so it sparked kind of curiosity in me. I was like, okay, there's something here. And I'm the type of person where if that happens, I'm going to dive in and just start researching and kind of uncover as much as I can. And I uncovered a lot. I uncovered a ton of academic research and clinical research that have been done over the past decade, and was just shocked at how much body of work there had been done. And this is the first time I had heard about any of this stuff. And I was like, dude, why is no one talking about this, And so just kind of dove deeper and deeper and deeper into it. Stasis was already, in its infancy at that point. And this is something that not a lot of people know, but we actually started the company geared around trying to develop a commercial smart cold tub. That was the first product that we had intended on building. the pandemic started probably 4 months after this, and that kind of quickly shut down the plans of, we're going to build these commercial tubs and like place them into CrossFit gyms and other like commercial fitness gyms. They all closed down when the pandemic started. So we were kind of, stuck around. Everyone thought this was going to, quickly be resolved in the course of a couple of weeks. And after sitting around for a couple of months, we're like, all right, like this isn't going away. We need to figure out something else, or Stasis is going to have a short lifespan. And that's kind of where we decided the idea to kind of pivot more onto focusing on developing like evidence-based breathing programs, particularly for military personnel and athletes in the beginning. And then, a couple months later, we developed some relationships with some of the top doctors that were fighting the pandemic. And that's kind of how we got into the healthcare space. And then we've been going hard at that for the past 2 years now.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah. When I was going through the website, I was super interested to see that. If we, so if I go back to that point in time where your buddies started to introduce you to hot and cold exposure and breath work and applying it through CrossFit and running. And I know I've heard from some other friends that a lot of that, everything you just listed off, even like sensory deprivation float tanks, a lot of this is becoming less taboo, more embraced, especially in the special operations community. How far in your Navy career were you introduced to that? Was it early, kind of mid, late? Did it apply there?
So no, it was later end of my career. I mean, like sauna and cold baths was like something that, I think guys always knew about just from like growing up playing sports. And it was always like a thing that people did, but there was no purpose or intentionality behind it. And I don't think anyone really knew what they were doing. Like they read it in a magazine, or some, one of your football coaches said, hey, you got to hop in this ice bath after every practice. And like, okay, sure, it makes me feel good. But no one really knew like what the mechanism of action was, or what was going on, from a physiology standpoint. But yeah, it was later end in my career. This was a couple of years before I got out, when kind of all this was coming to light. And it was something like you mentioned it earlier. It was something that, was talked about a lot in like these small human performance circles, or like, top tier athletes, special operations. But it was right around that time when like Wim Hof was really going mainstream. And he's the, I think no matter what you feel about the guy, he's the one that kind of put this stuff on the map for the Western culture. So it's pretty cool to see what's happened over the past 5 years. And even like where I am now, I'm seeing a lot of these, digital therapeutics and health companies starting to be a lot more open-minded into looking at meditation and breathing practices from like a healthcare standpoint, which is awesome to see. And we'll see how long it takes big pharma to kind of squash some of these efforts, but at least people are willing to kind of step out of their box and look and see that there's a lot of good research, ton of good clinical research being done right now on all these topics too. So yeah, it's super exciting.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the problem, right? Is even Wim, I think through his cold exposure and the amazing stuff he does with it and the records he's setting, he's bringing some publicity to the exercise and the benefit, and he is a personality in himself. And if it were up to him, he'd probably give it all away for free. But he's he's pretty forthright about like he's not special. He can teach it to anybody, and it's just sort of natural wisdom that I think he sort of says he came across. But I think he also references a lot of yoga. These are ancient breath practices that we're reapplying or rediscovering. I'm maybe equally skeptical. Like it's free medicine, so is big pharma gonna let that persist? I don't know how you charge us to breathe, but they'll figure out a way.
Yeah.
No, I was asking the Navy question because I was curious. I mean, like EOD, and for people that aren't familiar, you're dealing with explosives, right? Disposal of IEDs and things like that. Were there breathing techniques that go along with having the nerves and the calm to deal with those kind of situations?
No, there weren't. And that's something that's like kind of near and dear to my heart now, and it's why I'm so eventually like want to get more involved with those communities, because there's so much that guys could take away from this, just being educated on the topic. And it's something that's a struggle for a lot of like soft training pipelines, right? Is like they're always trying to figure out how can we induce the most amount of stress but still keep students safe, right? But also they want to mimic those real world combat environments as much as possible. But it was never anything that was really intentionally spoken about or trained to us. And it's a big gap, I think, in the training, because it's something so simple that people have access to, and it can play such a dramatic effect in, you know, who you are in the moment, right? In that second by second moment. And you have the ability to kind of really down regulate your system and get like hyper focused on a given task in a very stressful environment, which is like what they want you to do. They haven't been able to, I think, like articulate or train people in these like, you know, more esoteric modalities, I guess, if you want to call it, even though that's not the case. Everything's backed by science now. But there's still that kind of like switch in a lot of guys' mindset where it's like, oh, you're gonna teach me how to breathe, bro. You know, like I'm a college D1 athlete or whatever the case is. You're dealing with like knuckle draggers for the most part here. So, you know, getting them to sit down and do like a 10-minute breathing exercise or be open to like meditation and mindfulness is a tough task. But again, in the past couple of years, I've seen leaps and bound effort from the community. And it's mainly due to like guys like myself and a bunch of other buddies that I know that are out in the public now talking about these things. And that's typically what it takes to like see change in communities like this is, you know, they want to see some people that they actually know and trust, like give them data and be the spokesperson for it. And then a lot of guys are open-minded to at least trying it out, you know?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that you're putting yourself out there and doing that. I'm surprised that there wasn't, at least at that time, more of that. But I'll give you like a flip side of that challenge once you come across it, and hey, I guess good problem to have at that point is, it's a weird way to say it, but had a guy on the show who is now a civilian veteran, very mindful sort of guy. He was a tier 1 sniper in Canada. And somehow in the conversation, we started talking about box breathing, and it was a technique that he was taught or was familiar with at the time he was active. And he was practicing so much in his career as a sniper that it's really associated for him to his PTS, right? So this down regulating, stress reducing breathing technique, for him, it's linked to high stress situations, and now he can't do it, right? So now he's got to kind of adapt to other techniques.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought about it like that, but that makes total sense. If that's like your thing that triggers that memory of those traumatic events, that could be detrimental for sure.
Yeah, we're complex creatures.
Yeah.
So it's awesome that I mean, I love the cold tub idea, right? We need more of that around, but I love the pivot, right? Which is probably perfect coming from your background, adapt and overcome. And so the focus that you guys have been able to find or start chipping away at in applying breath in a COVID world, right? We know it's at least to some degree a respiratory related virus. I don't know. It's hard to get like the real story, the real data, the real whatever in any of this. But like you mentioned like top athletes, right? I grew up playing soccer. My son plays club level soccer. And so we love watching like Spanish league soccer, English Premier League soccer. And you've got some of the fittest athletes in the world falling down with heart problems, right? Or can't breathe. And
scary stuff.
It's super scary, and we don't necessarily know why yet. And I'm not convinced that we're really putting an effort to uncover why. But one theory that was put forth was, oh, well, the guys that are collapsing are mouth breathers. Well, okay, so why didn't they collapse before this in big numbers like they are now? But I mean, maybe if we could launch off of that, and you mentioned nasal breathing earlier, how are you guys applying breath within the medical community and what you're doing through physical therapy for COVID?
Yeah. So our whole approach has been from the beginning, we've seen that we've been focused on a subset of COVID. They call themselves like COVID long haulers. They've actually we call them, it's post acute COVID syndrome is like what they've actually come up with the medical term, I guess, for it. But these are people that have recovered from the initial acute illness and then are showing more long-term symptoms 3 to 6 months. I mean, we've been working with some patients that are going on like 2 years now of still kind of dealing with symptoms that they believe were from the initial acute phase of COVID. And it's a bunch of symptoms, right? It's a bucket of symptoms, and it all is stemmed from the autonomic nervous system, which becomes somewhat imbalanced for some reason due to the virus, and it tends to lead people to be stuck in this hypersympathetic state, right? And if like the physiology of the nervous system, that can lead to a ton of dismantling of a lot of the organs and subsystems that your body depends on. So talking about like heart rate, blood pressure, skin temperature, your sleep patterns, your awake, your focus, all this stuff is kind of seems to get disorganized, and it's causing these people to have like pretty crippling symptoms for a long period of times. And so that was kind of our initial thing, is like, okay, we're just going to focus on trying to rebalance the autonomic nervous system and basically just slow everything down, try to focus on activating that parasympathetic branch by doing all down regulating style breathing exercises, and we've seen really good success with that so far.
Wow, that's awesome. Is you mentioned you're evidence based, and you love kind of being data driven and scientific and proof. Are there I mean, just think about like the explosion of wearables that are
Hmm.
out there now, from the Aura Ring to, I'm a Garmin guy,
Yeah,
to
I got a Whoop.
got your Whoop. Are any of those really like connecting those dots yet on breath work, on mindfulness, and how that's, I mean, usually we'll get heart rate and HRV and things like that. Are they connecting the dots between breath and mindfulness practices to some of those biometrics?
Yeah, there's some research out there. The problem is, and what I've seen is like typically when you have a wearable company, the product for them is the data and the insights, and so they're not necessarily looking at training or how can we affect these data points. Like for Whoop, for instance, like I love Whoop, and it gives you all your scores and kind of your heart rate and your sleep score and all this stuff, and you can track kind of like your day-to-day things through a journal feature where you can kind of tell it, yeah, I did breath work at this time of the day or whatever. um, but I that's the missing piece in my mind with a lot of stuff, is like pairing the wearable data sensors, but then also giving some sort of training or like some sort of program where you can actually like look at the day to day and see the difference in the metrics. So there's a company called Leaf Therapeutics that's out there right now that's monitors your HRV, and they're focused on like mindfulness approach, and basically like it's a wearable that you wear on your heart.
Hmm.
And I think it like vibrates when you get stressed out to kind of remind you to slow down your breathing pattern. So there are definitely companies like working on some solutions to this right now. I just don't think it's been the focus, but there is a lot of like clinical research out there that shows clear evidence of heart rate variability being affected by your breathing patterns, and certain respiration rates
Mhm.
having the most effect on heart rate variability. So there's a lot of data points out there that people can look at.
Are you guys seeing anything on, like, I know O2 saturation levels were one of the things people were monitoring during COVID.
Yeah, this was actually a pretty interesting thing that we learned, because that was such a hot topic that everyone was talking about. And it was something that we got all the time because all these people were so confused. They're like, hey, I'm monitoring my SpO2 levels and they're at 98% all the time, but I still feel breathlessness. I still can't breathe properly. Like, what's going on? And so we're like, all right, well, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, what's the missing piece? And so Mount Sinai, one of the healthcare systems that we work with, they started testing people's end tidal CO2 levels, and they found that all these or the majority of the patients that were reporting these symptoms that had normal O2 levels were below normal CO2 levels. And that was kind of like when we had our aha moment. We're like, okay, it's for sure a breathing issue. Like, if we just can regulate their breathing volume and slow down their respiration rate, we should see end tidal go up, and that should help out with some of their breathlessness. And sure enough, like, that was the case. So that was kind of like the missing piece, I think, early on, is people were really confused. And that's where we had a really cool, like, learning point for a lot of these patients that we're working with, is like, they didn't know any of this stuff. And most doctors and physical therapists don't get, if any, education, maybe an hour lecture or something during their their studies when they're going through medical school and stuff around breathing and the respiratory system. So we were kind of educating them on, hey, like, this end tidal CO2 is actually like directly linked to likely people's breathing patterns. And most of these patients were hyperventilating chronically too. And so it was just like all the kind of like little evidence points popped up, and it was like, okay, this makes sense now why we're seeing these. And if we do this, we should see all these kind of correlation metrics start to change. And that's what we've been seeing.
Wow, that's super interesting. I think when I started learning about breath, yeah, that was one of the first things, is like, started to talk about how to breathe. I'm like, what do you mean how to breathe? Right. I'm 40 something years old,
Yeah.
and we started talking about, well, nostril breathing and mouth breathing, they're kind of going to the same place, but it's not the same. Right. And then we started talking about diaphragmatic breathing, and, deep and low and slow versus shallow and rapid. Like, okay, yeah, we just never talk about this. Like,
Yeah.
it's hugely important, and it's hugely different. And it has I think that's what you're talking about, effectively, the impact of that shallow rapid breathing, throwing off those O2 CO2 balance levels.
Yeah. And it's like, it's crazy because, again, most people go their whole lives without ever thinking about, like, consciously thinking about how they're breathing. Yet it has the ability to have such a huge impact on your health and wellness and kind of general well-being. So that's why it was like such a big surprise to me when we really started to kind of dive into all this stuff of like, why is no one talking about this? Like, why isn't someone, screaming this from the top? Like, because it's such an easy thing that people have access to and don't need gadgets or, any special thing. Like, you just need some peace and quiet and some time to yourself. It's really interesting though, just looking at how much has changed over the past like year, really. And like, in this space, in the breathing space, per se, there's a lot of people are starting to wake up and are trying to start to devise how people can make a buck off this, for sure. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of, there'll be some big billion-dollar company in the next 5 to 10 years that'll be focused around respiratory health, for sure.
Oh, for sure. The only thing I don't like about like the Whoop or the Garmin is I'll go do something and it'll say you need to rest for 48 hours. Like, I'm not going to rest for 48 hours. So I don't know. Maybe the thing's going to say, hey, you can't breathe for 5 hours. Like, what are you talking about? What with Stasis and that shift you guys have made to the medical community, how does for the consumer space, maybe somebody through their own issues with COVID is aware that they have what you described, kind of long haul COVID or the residual symptoms from after the acute, and they're dealing with a doctor, or they're dealing with therapy, or maybe even just somebody that's got other causes of stress and cortisol and all the things of the nervous system activation you mentioned, that just wants to figure out, hey, how do I down regulate? Is there a way to go to like your healthcare provider or system or PT and ask for something like Stasis offers?
Yeah, definitely. Please do tell your doctor you want that to be an option. We do have like a number of like referral partners that we work with, like just clinics and stuff throughout the country. But I mean, the easiest way, we're none of our services are covered by insurance yet right now, so people would have to pay out of pocket anyways, but they can just like go directly to the website and
Okay.
learn a bunch. We have a ton of like free content on there, and breathing programs, and if they want to work with like a special respiratory coach, they can do that. And so yeah, just a lot of options to kind of get involved with what we're doing.
Okay. Amazing. So that's stasis.life.
Yep.
And then, yeah, let's shift a little bit here and talk about shift. So I know this also takes a huge amount of your time, and thank you for this as well. So here at Shift, you're really helping veterans in that transition from the military world to civilian careers. I know some amazing executives and a lot of veterans in the corporate world that are huge assets to the companies they've joined. A lot of times they're hugely in demand for companies that think that way, or maybe MBA schools that want them to come through there and then jump out to the civilian world. But I also know there's still at least the perception of a big divide there, and I think part of that, like I would love to see a lot of the corporate world be more structured and disciplined. And I know I've heard from a number of veterans, like, you kind of want to get out and you're tired of somebody telling you how to live your life and spend every minute of your time. But then as soon as you do, you sort of miss that structure and that routine. That's probably just one silly little challenge. What kind of challenges are you solving, and what's out there with Shift, and where are you guys at with it right now?
Yeah, so Shift's been around for I think at least 5 or 6 years now. And the problem that we're typically setting out to solve is two-faced. It's on the military candidate side, and it's on the recruiter side as well. And it's how do we take these people with these unique skill sets and experiences, take that military career, that 10 or 20-year military career, how do we translate that into a sales job or a customer success job or operations job at Google or some Series A fast growing startup? And that's a hard thing to do, right? Like, because a lot of these recruiters, one, know nothing about the military. They have, again, misconceptions in their mind based off of what they see in Hollywood or on TV. And then you also have this military candidate who just did 10 or 20 years in the military, was at the kind of top of his rank and his organizational structure. And now he's trying to figure out, okay, how do I take all this stuff that's really ambiguous that you do in the military? And now I have to completely kind of transform myself and be able to tell a really good story of why I should be your next account executive at a growing startup when you've had zero private sector experience. That's a tough thing to do. And like, I went through this thing myself, right? And I'm a really good case study around Shift because I went through we offer these skill bridge internship programs, really cool program that's offered by the DoD now, that it allows transitioning service members to basically get released by their military command for the last 6 months while they're on active duty. And you can go and complete a full-time internship at a company of your choice.
Wow.
It's at zero cost to the employer because the candidate continues to receive their full-time pay and benefits by the military. So it's like a win-win situation for both parties, right? Awesome experience on the candidate side. Employer gets a free employee for 6 months and kind of gets to test them out before offering them hopefully a full-time job. So I did one of these internship programs when I was getting out with a pretty rapidly growing startup based in San Francisco on like their go-to-market team. I joined the military right out of high school, so no idea what I was doing. Awesome experience, got to learn a ton about like sales and just how a private sector company works, right? Then went off and did my own thing with Stasis for like 18 months before I ended up back at Shift as an account executive on the sales team, where now I'm selling a SaaS product to other, growing companies, but had never done this before. And so like, we're just kind of like trying to practice what we preach of veterans. Like, the reason why companies typically want to hire veterans is for their soft skills, right? Like, there's intangible assets. Like, these are people that can operate in ambiguous, very high stress environments. They're mission focused. They can get shit done, right? They're fast learners. They don't need someone to kind of watch over their shoulders every step of their way and tell them what to do. You can give them a problem and they will figure out how to solve it. The problem is like, a lot of these companies want people that have industry experience, or, this real niche set of technical skills, which a lot of veterans typically just aren't going to have coming out of the military. But all these things are teachable. Like, you can teach someone that in a month or two during your onboarding process. And that's like where we're really trying to hone in and educate companies. Like, these are people that you can bring in and like teach them all these skills that you're going to have to teach any employee anyways, like how to use your tech stack, or, how to use LinkedIn and Zoom info and all these things that, like, people can learn how to do really fast. You want this person on your team because once you do teach them those skills, they're going to outperform people from off the street, pretty much every time. So it's a fun problem to try to solve.
Yeah, I was just thinking about kind of putting that in the context of some of the types of organizations I've had exposure to over the years. I could see where, I mean, I know that there are veteran hiring initiatives at huge corporations that have been around, but at the same time, a lot of these huge corporations are so slow to change, and the environment and the career path tends to be very sort of political and slow and stepwise, and someone's got to die or retire for you to move, type of thing. Versus I've done a lot in the consulting world, which is very much about like just bring in good raw talent and then mold them, which I think is kind of what we're talking about here, right? I mean, who goes to school, gets a degree, or learn something on the job, and then that's the only thing they ever do forever. Like, it just doesn't happen anymore, right?
Yeah. Especially right? Nowadays. I mean, like the corporate world is changing so fast now that,
so fast.
Like, it doesn't matter who you are, what your position is. Like, in 2 years, your job's probably going to look completely different than it does now.
Exactly. So for me, it's like, you go to school to learn how to learn, or you go somewhere else to train how to learn.
Yeah.
And then it's about adaptability, and startup. I mean, that's perfect for that, right? Like, you got to wear so many hats in a startup company, and just, there's no playbook. Like, half the time you just got to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, you can bring somebody in that's got, it's good, all the things you mentioned, plus team player, discipline, consistency, work ethic, structure, like all the things to chip away and just solve problems. And if you can learn quickly as you go, man, what a formula.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it works out for companies really well that figure out how to do it and kind of structure their organization and culture around being open-minded to stuff like that.
Is there, I mean, just thinking like in veteran centric conversations, a lot of times, we're also mentioning and talking about problems, challenges for that community, right? So how are we treating PTS? How are we dealing with other things that folks are living with, whether it's physical or mental health, the suicide problem that we've got? Does that become part of the equation? Like, are companies concerned about mental health as they're also looking about skill sets?
I would have to assume that's definitely something that's probably talked about in closed door conversations. It's nothing that's ever been brought up to me like in a conversation before. But again, I think it's just like a misconception that people have that every military veteran has PTSD or has some mental health challenges or whatever. And it's like, most people in the world, no matter what, if you're a military veteran or not, have some sort of mental health issue going on, especially right now. So it's like, right. Is that really the thing that we should be most focused on right now? I don't think so. It's definitely something that I'm glad is getting more limelight and like talked about, and a lot of really good alternative, therapeutics with psychedelics and stuff being looked at right now in that space. And again, I'm super optimistic about what the future holds for mental health. But yeah, I don't know if it's a big barrier to a lot of companies. I would assume that it's definitely, again, something that people think about, but I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's come up explicitly. I don't know if it's like a taboo that's unmentioned.
Yeah.
Um, but it's it's like I've got a buddy that medically retired from the Marines very early. He's in his late 30s now. He's been out for a while. Got blown up twice over in Afghanistan, and the physical, mental, emotional effects of that are real, and they're a challenge. But man, he's one of the I mean, he's a super guy. Like I would love to see that guy get back to work and do something. He's got so many gifts that he's ready to bring to the world as soon as he's ready, right? At the same time, like you're saying, like who hasn't had stress in their life, right? Who hasn't had trauma in their life that we're all dealing with, and maybe not in the healthiest ways over the last 2 or 3 years as we've isolated from each other, and we're all making that adjustment back to not even necessarily back to working in person yet,
Yeah.
right? Working remotely, but maybe that's a good thing if you're trying to put people to work. If you can connect remotely, if you're able to place staff from the East Coast to the West Coast and work virtually, the startup world, at least for me, I would take anybody anywhere if they're the right person to get the job done.
Yeah, the shift has been fully remote since the beginning of the pandemic. So our whole team's fully remote now, and it's all I've known in the private sector is remote. I've never gone into an office before, so I'm all about it. I love it. I do miss it. It was something very challenging, honestly, going through that during my transition out of the military. To not have kind of just going in somewhere where you're around a like-minded group of people all setting out to solve the same problem. That was a very challenging time for me for my mental health just over the past couple of years, and still is like something where I kind of miss the camaraderie of just being around, like the team every day and stuff like that. But that's something that everyone has to go through, no matter if you're going to be working in person or not. It's just like you'll never replace those friendships and that bond that you build with those people when you serve with. So you just have to find a new tribe.
Yeah, for sure. And right now the tribe's pretty virtual, but the organizational structure side of that too is a loss, right? You go from all these resources, and I'm sure sometimes they're slow and laden with paperwork and all that in the military. But there's a structure there, right? And you're going to find where to go to, and all of a sudden now you're in the private sector. That whole structure is gone. Where do you go to bridge this and to find that next career opportunity? So is that part of what Shift is providing as well? And I guess that's by way of sort of asking, who would want to reach out to you, and how would they do so? What's there for whether somebody's recently
Sure.
transitioned out or they're a veteran that's been around for a while and looking for a change?
Yeah, so actually really cool. Like we have programs for active duty personnel, people that are transitioning, or veterans that have already transitioned,
Okay,
have
nice.
5 or 10 years in the private sector and want to make some sort of career change. We have programs for all those types of people. So if you're in one of those buckets, you can definitely just go to shift.org or reach out to me, and I'll kind of help solve some problems or help guide you in the right way if I can.
Awesome. I'm just looking at the website here a little bit more. So it's like spot on: active duty, career transition, and post military. And I just scrolling through here, I noticed you got a section that's called partners. Are these corporate partners that have really signed up to help the program?
Yeah, so those are the companies that I'm going after every day, right? And so we're always looking for new companies that want to partner with us to hire the best military talent that the country has to offer. We've actually built like a software marketplace for these companies to directly kind of source the top military talent. So we're gonna two-sided marketplace, like we're sourcing and then training the top military talent. And then once they're active in the job search, we feature them on our talent tool platform that all of our hiring partners have access to.
Oh, super cool. Um, that sounds great. Just curious, as you thinking about who's on the platform right now, not only from the partner side but the resource side, as far as folks looking for opportunities. So there's been this initiative recently, military, government employees, government contractors, you got to get vaccinated or you're out
Mhm.
by a certain date. Are you, has that changed the flow of folks? Like, are you seeing more people bail out or get kicked out right now and looking for jobs, or is it going the other way?
I haven't. I don't know if the pendulum has shifted dramatically in one way or the other. I mean, I know personal people that have are going through issues right now due to not wanting to get the vaccination or vaccine, and then some people are definitely getting kicked out. That's a real thing for sure. But yeah, I haven't seen like any crazy number flux in one way or the other that I'm privy to, at least.
Gotcha. All right. Well, hey, I want to thank you, Josh, for everything you're doing. I want to be respectful of your time. We're coming up on the hour here. Just to recap quickly, so you have stasis.life. So that's what we talked about in terms of breath health and some techniques and all the technology and evidence-based work you're doing in that realm. And that's certainly somebody, folks can approach you guys directly
Mhm.
on that, or request it through their doctor, through their physical therapist. And then we got shift.org. So whether you are somebody listening as an organization that wants to tap into the best talent coming out of the military, or veterans looking for a change, or they're getting out soon. And then you also have joshduntz.com. So you got a personal website. What's going on there? I want to make sure we mention it before we break.
I don't know. I haven't been on there in a while. I kind of built it one day on a whim, and it just talks about kind of all of my projects that I have going on, and it talks about like Stasis, um, some podcast stuff that I was doing. I do some writing on there. I like come up with some creative poems and stuff just as a creative outlet that are on there. I think that's it. I don't know what else is on there, but yeah, you can get in touch with me through there if you want to either too.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
guess just in terms of people getting in touch with you through the corporate website's personal website, or are you active on social media? What's going
I'm
on there?
actually not. I'm active on LinkedIn. I would say if you want to get in touch with
Okay,
me, LinkedIn would be the best platform. But yeah, I deleted all my other
good for you.
social media stuff. Just I, it was about probably a couple months ago now, and I was like, man, I don't even think about it anymore. I'm like, my life is just as good as it was with all these platforms. I was like, ah,
Probably better.
yeah, way better. Like I'm not sitting there just scrolling and stuff. So I'll still go on, like I'll download it on my phone once in a while and just kind of check in, and then I'll like delete it again. But yeah, I feel way more just like mental clarity, and I'm not on those things all day long.
I can believe it. All right. Well, we'll get links up with the show notes for this one to the Stasis website, the Shift website, and then and I'll find your profile on LinkedIn, and we'll get a link to that for people that want to reach out, if they got questions or just want to kind of tune into what you guys are doing. I appreciate what you did for the country for 10 years, Josh. I mean, what a stressful job. And then, I mean, what you're doing now, right? Startups are pretty stressful. You guys have pivoted through the pandemic. I applaud the pivot, and great things to come, man. I'm such a believer in the breath work, and I love the mission with veteran placement.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me on and let me talk about some of the projects I'm passionate about and been working on for a while now. And look forward to getting in touch with some of your listeners. Like if they want to learn more or just kind of shoot the shit. I love having these conversations and meeting new people. So whether it's just a friendly conversation or we can collaborate and try to do something cool together, would love to get in touch with folks.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for opening the door to that. I know we got a lot of executives in the listener community. We also got a lot of veterans out there, so
Very
we'll get in
cool.
touch.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks again, Josh.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks again to Josh Duntz, everybody. Josh Duntz of Stasis and of Shift. There'll be links to Josh, his three websites, his personal website, Stasis and Shift, along with his LinkedIn page and his Instagram page. Those are all up in the show notes to this episode at men2mastery.com/107. All right, guys, that's it with Josh this week. Again, we're back to where we started. BHAGs, get some scary stuff on the calendar and let me know what it is. Reach out on Instagram. Always love hearing those things. Send me pictures, stuff I can share. What else? Breath work, right? Get into it, whether it's through Stasis, similar oxygen advantage, Wim Hof, those breath holds will help with that CO2 tolerance. There are numerous others, brands around similar techniques, but the benefits are the same. good stuff out there. Get into it, or a reminder if you need it to get back to it. And these are things not just for adults, right? You can share these with your kids and your other significant family members as well. And then next week, quick preview, Chris Patrick. I won't get into too much of it today, but episode 108 coming up with Chris Patrick. Really interesting guy with a pretty powerful story and outlook on life. You're going to enjoy that one. All right, that's it for this week, guys. Get after those BHAGs. Let me know what they are. See you next week.